Hello everyone, I'm Chris Fields. You may know me for a few different things, but if you're here at this specific video, you probably know me as the guy who made these. The most frequent question I get asked whenever I publish a new sprite animation is how I actually make them in the first place. So that is what this video is all about. I'm going to show you my process from the very beginning, from step 1 all the way to the finished product. So by the time you're finished watching this video, you too can create your own sprite animations for, well, really anything. You just have to be creative about it. Or if you're just along for the ride because you want to know how they're made in the first place, welcome aboard, we're glad to have you. So how do I make a sprite animation? Well, let's break it up into a few different steps. Step 1. Come up with an idea. Frankly, this step is almost the most important one. If I don't have ideas, you don't have animations to watch. So you just have to come up with an idea, whatever it may be. The things I need these characters to do aren't usually too complex, and I don't intend for these to be over a minute long when I start, so I can usually come up with an idea in my head which closely matches what you end up seeing in real life yourself. However, in the cases I do want to have a more complex animation, I'll actually write myself an outline for what I want these characters to do. So I'll have whatever characters I want, whatever locations it's set in, if there's any additional assets I need to plan for including, and then the storyboard where I go over the actual script you see. For example, this is the outline I used for the Maybe Sheba is Right animation. So you can see that I planned out pretty much all these details from the beginning, and I made a few adjustments here and there, and I think this animation ended up much better because of the planning. However, I think the best way to showcase the behind the scenes for my process is to actually create a new sprite animation for you guys today. So for demonstration purposes, let's write an outline that is incredibly simple. So let's work with this scenario. Mia gives Garrett a flower. Very simple story, should not be too hard to make an animation of. For characters, we obviously need Mia and Garrett. For the additional assets, we'll need a flower and a flower field. And for the actual storyboard, Mia's just walking around a field of flowers, she sees one that strikes her, she goes to get it, and then the flower in the background disappears. We'll transition to a new scene where Mia walks over to Garrett, gives him the flower, he smiles. Very simple scenario. Step 2 is to assemble the sprites for use. So the next step is to obviously gather all the resources we'll need for the sprite animation. The first place I go to whenever I need sprites of any game is the Spriters resource. It is an extensive compilation that has video game sprites from all different console generations, and obviously Golden Sun is a part of that. There's all these different sprites here you could use, however, I just need some of the characters. So here's Mia, as well as Jenna and Sheba, but we don't have to worry about them. Thankfully, it does have what we need, all of her different animations and poses. So we're going to right-click the image, go to Save Image As, and we will just pick a destination for it. I have a folder that I could use for this. We'll just save it right here. However, if you're paying attention, you'll notice that Garrett is not actually on this database anywhere to be found, so that means I will have to rip his sprites myself, and I'll show you how I do that as well. So what I have here is a tool that basically takes a ROM of Golden Sun, and it allows you to see all the data that's inside it. So what we care about is the character sprites. So we can see here, Garrett is right up front and center, and all these sprites are here in the game's files. We can pull whichever ones we like. So let's just use this one as an example, just his normal front-facing sprite. And what we're gonna do is Options, Save Sprite As, and you can save this wherever you want as well. We'll just go to my desktop, my sprite resources, and just name this Demo, and there we go. It's not at all a difficult process, however, you have to do that for every single sprite and animation you want to use. So every frame of walking, all the other poses you want, just even all the directions Garrett's turned to. Thankfully, I've done all of that before, so I don't have to do it again, and I'm not going to make you guys sit through all that legwork for just demonstration purposes. Hopefully you've seen enough after just that one you could replicate it however many times you need to yourself. But that's not all though. In addition to the sprites and visuals, we also need some audio complements as well. The music and the sound effects. How do I go about procuring those as well? Well, I'm going to show you that too. Thankfully, the Golden Sun subreddit actually has everything we need, just in a few different places. So if you were to actually go down here to its sidebar, you'll notice some helpful download links that will get you the soundtracks for all the Golden Sun games. As for the sound effects, I found this thread of a person asking where they could find the MP3 files for themselves, and a user by the name of Robert Joe has conveniently compiled all of these things together. So that's where I got it from. So now that we have all the resources we potentially need gathered together, we still have to do a little bit of work to make them usable for our animations. So step number 3 is to clean them up in a photo editor. Because go figure, an entire sprite sheet of data is not really going to help us in actually animating. First, we have to separate all of those frames into individual files for the ones we need. Again, I've done all of this already. I'm just going to show you a small sample of how it's done so that you know what to do yourself. So here I have the sprite sheet that we downloaded a little bit earlier. We're going to zoom into the top corner here so we get a better view of what we're working with. Let's just use this first sprite of Mia as a demonstration. So what we're going to do is we're going to want to crop around this for a 32 by 32 pixel canvas, so to say. So that's what we're doing. We're just cropping so we have 32 by 32. The reason I chose this specific resolution is because that's actually what most of the sprites in Golden Sun's actual game files are based around. They're 32 and 32 size, even if they don't use that full space. Make sure that it's centered to the bottom of the image as best as you can. You might have to just judge it or play around to find the exact positioning, but just do that as well. It makes referencing and consistency a whole lot easier. Then all we need to do at this point is to go to our eraser and then the magic eraser tool, and then we click the background so we erase that. So what we have is a transparent background against the actual sprite of Mia. And that's all we need Photoshop for, really. So to export that and make it into a more usable, friendly format for our animations, we're going to go to File, Export, and Export As. And this opens up a whole bunch of options for us to go with. So first of all, for the file settings, you want a file format that supports transparent backgrounds, so PNG or GIF, it doesn't matter, whichever one you prefer. I use PNGs, so we're going to just stick with that. And for 32 by 32, like I said, that's the sprite size that we want. For scale, what we're going to do is we're going to actually upscale the image to 400% of its original resolution. The reason I do that is because if I were to plug in the actual 32 by 32 sprite into an animation, when you blow that animation up to fit the screen you're viewing it on, it looks pretty terrible. But as you can see, this also looks terrible because we just blew it up without any regard as to what upscaling method we used. So we're going to go to Resample and then Nearest Neighbor, and this actually preserves the pixel resolution, just upscales it to a perfect degree so that it looks nice and consistent. And that's all you really need to worry about, so just export that to wherever it is you had it. So we'll just go with our Mia demo here, just replace that, and that's what you need to do. And again, you have to do that for every single frame of animation you want to cover. So it's not a difficult process, but it is a long one. Thankfully, you only need to do it once for every character you want to use, and I have all of this already exported out in the first place anyway, so we can just skip on to the next step, which is the fun part. Step 4, animation time. So now we're finally at the part of the process you probably wanted to see the most. A lot of people are actually very curious about what tools I use to animate the sprites. A lot of people think I must use some animation tool or even a game engine to actually move these sprites in a playable space. I actually don't, if you believe it or not. The tool I use is Adobe Premiere, which is not even really meant for animations. But it's the tool I use because it's the tool I know. You could probably get some more mileage out of actual animation software. I'm just sticking with what I know. So here we have a blank project that we'll be basing the whole animation off of. The first thing you're going to want to do is to import your assets. The easiest way to do that is to open up the folder you have and just drag all of the contents in here. I don't need to do that. I imported the folder already along with a few other things, so we can just minimize that. So once all of your assets are imported, we can actually go about creating a sequence so that we can use them. To do that, go to File, New, and then Sequence. All these presets are not going to be very useful to us, so we'll be creating our own. So go to Settings, and for editing mode, go to Custom. It's the very first option. Then for time base, set it to 60 frames per second. The reason we're using this specific time base is because the Golden Sun games on Game Boy Advance ran at what is essentially 60 frames per second. So we're doing this to make the animations have a more authentic feel. For the frame size, it does not matter what you select. You could make these as big or as small as you want. It depends on how much space you need. Usually I do 700 by 700. It's probably not the most optimal resolution, but it is what I use nonetheless. I won't need that much space today, so we're just going to do 400 by 400. Doing this, you'll notice that it's also not a perfectly square aspect ratio, which is kind of a problem. So for the pixel aspect ratio, we're going to select Square Pixels 1.0, should be the first option once again, and there we go, now we have a perfectly square box. And that's pretty much all you need to worry about for this, so you can name this whatever you want. We'll name it Demo. And then you can save the preset if you want to refer back to this exact setup later, or not, it's up to you. I don't need this for later, I'll be changing it again, so I'll just say okay for now. And there we go, this black box is the video we're working with. These are the video tracks, the audio tracks. Every media we will put into goes here, and it will reflect up here. So let's start by giving this a background so we know what we're going up against. So we're going to go to our flower field number 2, I believe is the first one. Yes, there we go. Will give us enough space, and you can see it's up here perfectly fine. There's one thing you might want to pay attention to however, if we zoom in, you might notice sometimes that your pixels are off base. We'll go up here so it's easy to see. It might be a bit difficult since all of this is green and it kind of blends together, but you'll notice that these are perfectly square pixels aligned up against the edges. If it was just a little bit off, because remember, we upscaled this by 4 times, you'll notice that there's a little bit of hangover where the pixels aren't entirely square. So the easiest way to remember to do this is that since we upscaled it by 4 times, you'll want to always make sure your possessions are set by a multiple of 4. So 4, 8, 12, going all the way up. As long as it ends to something divisible by 4, you should be fine on where it's positioned. So now that we have a background laid out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create the animations that let characters walk around and have a nice fluid animation. The reason I do this is because it's a lot easier to move one object of moving pictures rather than a individual frame for every single animation. It's a bit hard to explain, it'll make more sense as we go along. So let's first create that object, and that's actually going to be called a nested sequence. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Mia, we're going to find our animations. We'll just do these upright walking animations because they're open and right here. So here's every single animation. They're all separated by like 5 or so seconds, so we obviously need to speed that up. So we're going to group all these images, right click, and then make a nested sequence, wherever that is, or nest. It's just called nest. And we'll say Mia walk. So if we're to open up this sequence, I'll actually put a backdrop so you guys can see this a little better as well. Okay, that's just a background so you guys can see what I'm doing a little bit easier. I'm going to just move this up by 1. So first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to select all of these, and we're going to go to speed and duration, and we're going to set its duration to 7 frames. The reason I choose 7 frames is because that's how long it takes for an animation to switch to the next frame when walking in Golden Sun. So that just makes it look consistent and easier. Then we will delete these spaces in between. And there we go, we have a walking sequence. It looks just like it does in the game. However, in addition to just the characters walking around, I also like to have a drop shadow underneath them, because that's also there in the actual Golden Sun game, and it looks a little nicer. It lets you know exactly where the character's standing on the frame. So we're going to add a drop shadow as well. So you might not be able to see it, any difference since I added it, but the drop shadow is there, it just happens to be behind Mia. So it is just at its origin right now. So the easiest way to know where to place a drop shadow is because of how we upscaled the sprites, I know that it will always be 56 pixels underneath the origin of the image. So this is the Y position value. What we're going to do is we're going to just add 56 to it, and that's where the drop shadow goes. And it'll always remain there. It's nice and consistent. We don't have to worry about positioning an individual drop shadow when we're animating Mia's sprites. It will always be there, and it makes it nice and easy to work with. So before we begin proper, I'm just going to explain one last thing, and that is where we move the sprites to. How do I figure that out? So if you were to go into the video effects of whatever media file you have selected on your timeline, you'll see this position value. There's a whole bunch of other transformation values as well. This basically tells the image or the video or whatever it is you're working with where it needs to be, how big it needs to be, how small it needs to be, how tilted it needs to be, all those different factors. Mostly, I really only care about the positioning values. So for the position values, the one on the left here, this left number, that is the X position value. What that does is it tells the image how many pixels to the right of the screen it needs to be. And then the Y position value on the right is how many pixels down from the top it needs to be on the frame. So it's a little bit maybe weird to get used to at first. Just play around with it, you'll figure it out eventually. So let's actually get around to animating these sprites. So the first thing I usually like to do when it comes to walking is to figure out where I want the sprite to end up first. So I'm going to have her walk past this flower initially. Let's just say she walks up over here first. And once again, we can zoom in, we can confirm where exactly we want her to be because we don't want her to not rest uneven against the pixels. So once again, pick numbers that are divisible by 4, and it will always look nice and consistent every single time. That's a little high up. I made a mistake. There we go. So let's say I want her to end up there first. No problem, easy enough. So what we're going to do is we're going to click this little clock icon called toggle animation. And what that does is it creates a keyframe. And that lets this data know, or this image know, that at this specific time, it needs to be at this position, 280 by 112. So if we're to create a frame earlier, another keyframe earlier, you press this little diamond icon, then we can move this position value and it will tell it, here's where you're starting and here's where you need to end up, and it needs to be in this specific time. So if we're to let this animation play out, there we go. We have movement. You can play around with this specific timing. Obviously, if you shorten the gap between these 2 points, Mia will travel faster. If you widen them, she'll take longer to get there. It's a lot of playing around and timing when it comes to the stage, so don't be afraid to just keep experimenting. Don't try to get it perfect with a consistent speed every time. Just try to get something that looks right, and most people usually won't notice. So when you figured out the actual position values you want, you're pretty good on that part. Obviously, Mia's still going to be walking in place because we still have the animation sequence set. So what we're going to do is we're going to move to where she wants to stop, and we'll cut off the sequence there, and then we'll add just a still frame of her looking to the right. Obviously, you'll notice that she is in a different position. She'll jump back to the origin point of the screen because that is the default value it's set to. So if you were to look up here, you'll notice that our previous position values for that keyframe was 280 at 112. So we're going to do those exact values once again. So there we go. She stopped. You'll notice that the drop shadow disappeared though because that is not a part of the individual frame. So I need to find out where I left my drop shadow. There it is. And once again, it'll always be the same X value for the drop shadow, but it's 56 points lower than the origin or the center point of this image. So 112, add 56 to that, which is 168. That looks about right. There we go. So obviously she needs to turn around to find this flower. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our sprites once again, and we're going to find the ones that correspond to the directions we need to turn. So first she'll turn to the down right, then she'll turn to the down position. So there we are. And then she'll once again turn to the down left. Although we're using a down right, I'll show you why in a moment. So obviously these are not at the same position, but rather than type that same position value in every single time, what we're going to do is we're going to copy this image, and then we're going to select all of these, and then paste the attributes. So you want to make sure that the motion is selected, and if you have scale attribute times on, you might want to turn it off for this specific process animations, because a lot of what I do is very timing specific, and it'll actually scale whatever timings down to however long the clip is. I don't want that. I just want the timings as I made them, so make sure that's probably turned off as well. But you especially want the motion, and if they have any other effects they share, make sure those are selected. But motion's all we care about, and as you can see, she's in the same position when turning. However, you'll notice that she looks back to the down right again when we want her to look down left. And if you've noticed how I laid out my sprites, you'll notice that I don't actually have any for down left, left, and up left. The reason I do this is because that's more sprites to export. I don't feel like doing that, and we can turn them around in the video editor anyway. So go to Effects, and you can search the effects by going through the folders individually, or you can just search them up in the search bar. So what we're going to do is we're going to search for flip, and then you'll see horizontal flip, and we're going to apply that to the one we want. So there we go. It looks like she made a full 90-degree turn, or is it 125? Who cares? She made a full turn rather than just what would have happened otherwise, where she just turns backward. So because of effects, we are able to do more with less. It is going to be the same case for the down right walk cycle, so we'll set that as well. I'll actually copy these attributes. So instead of her walking down right, we're going to paste them. She's walking down left now. So all we need to do is to create some keyframes and then figure out where she's going to stand. We'll say right here-ish. It's probably fine. Zoom in to clean that up just a little bit. So back one, and yeah, that's fine. And because I want her to kneel down, I have a sprite for that as well. It's somewhere. It's not an upright. It's just going to be, there we go, kneel down. There we go. I won't get it perfect. We'll do more cleanup later. Just to give us an idea of where we want position values to be right now. So now that we moved her to where we want her to be, we want her to pick up the flower, or at least remove it from the scene, but I don't want to figure out how to actually cut this flower out, but not the rest of the scene, so I did a clever solution, which is to just make a new background where the flower isn't there. Very creative, very simple solution. Sometimes creative as simple is way better than anything else. So now that we have this first part of the animation created, or at least laid out, we'll create the second scene with Garrett. We don't have to do anything special for that. We'll just lay all of this out very simply. So here is just a grass field as opposed to the flower field last time. We will lay Garrett somewhere around. I don't need him to animate, so we'll just have him be to the right here, wherever there we go. So he'll be over here somewhere, to the right. Let's push him 40 pixels over. Is that going to be enough? We'll say, yeah, you know what? We'll say 40 for now. That's fine. We'll also add in a few more tracks for him. You can just do that by dragging him up 1 or 2. It's not a big deal. And then once again, add a drop shadow. It is always going to be 56 points or 56 pixels down, and then he was 240. And then we can just drag that across the whole way since we won't need him to move around at all. And once again, I'm going to lay out the sprites I need so that he turns around once again. So 2 down rights, 1 down, and then another right as well. And we will once again copy, paste attributes so that they're all in the same position. And then for these last 2, we're obviously going to want to flip those around. So select those, and then if you to drag the horizontal flip, it'll apply to both of the ones you selected. So there we go. He has a nice smooth turn animation, except not that smooth because they're all still like 30 seconds apart. So we want him to turn around a little faster. That's fine. We'll clean it up later. It's fine. So before I start moving Mia over here, what I want him to do is to hold out his hand for the right cast. And we can just copy, paste attributes. And then we're going to get Mia to also hold out her right hand or left hand, however, whatever hands we're looking at right here. Because that way I will know the spacing between, or how much spacing I need. So we moved Garrett 40 pixels to the right, so let's move Mia 40 pixels back. And that's about where we need them to be. Yeah, that's fine positioning as far as I'm concerned. I will also add in another sprite for Mia. Needs to just be in the same exact position. Copy paste those attributes. You're going to be doing that a lot, copy pasting attributes. And yep, there we go. That's exactly where I need them to be. So with that animation, or with that information, I can begin animating Mia's walking. And again, it's just another simple walk to the right. Once more, we're going to create a keyframe. We're going to set that keyframe to 160 and 200 because that is where we want her to end up. And then after that, we'll just send her off to the edge of the screen and then back her up a few more pixels beyond that. We're going to add in the rows behind all of this so that it's underneath their hands. Actually want Mia to hold her hand out first with the rows. And then we'll play around with that a little more. We can just copy that by holding Alt and then drag and forth. That just creates a copy of that same sprite. And I also have a unique sprite for Garrett, just for the purposes of holding onto the flower. So we'll paste that. And if you remember, in our little outline we had written up, a happy little smile bubble will appear above Garrett's head because he'll be happy that Mia thought of him. So we're going to do that right now. So I have the happy icon right here, but obviously it's not animated or anything like that. And how are we going to do that? Well, again, I did most of this work already. I have a bin of a animation, or a, what's it called, icon from one of the other animations I used, where it just bounces up and down like it would in the actual game. So if you're curious how I went about doing this, I just basically did it manually. What I have with me is a whole bunch of Golden Sun footage from when I went to play the game myself. And what I did is basically, as best I can, was to emulate kind of how that bubble bounces. It's not exactly perfect, but you don't need perfect, you just need good enough, and as long as it's good enough, people will remember that's what it looked like. So just do the best you can. That's all you really need to do there. But I obviously only wanted to do that once and no other time, so what I did is I just copied this animation data, and then what I do is I find the one I want, make that a nested sequence again for the happy icon and go into that sequence, find wherever I put it, and just drag it down so it's easier to see, and then paste attributes. So there we go. And because it is a nested sequence, just like with the walking animations, we can move it to wherever we want to in the frame, and there will be absolutely no need to individually adjust or animate every single frame of animation regarding that. So we'll say it goes right there. Right there is fine, yes. And because we just moved that object rather than the actual picture it's based off of, it animates anywhere in the image it is. So now that we've got all of the basic animation laid out, now we can begin cleaning up and adding a bit more details here and there. Okay, I think I can say now that I'm much more happy with the timing of the video. I think it is paced out pretty well, so we can actually get on to the next part of the process, which is actually adding sound effects, which won't be a whole lot because there's not much that's really needed. I usually only add sound effects for a more exaggerated action, such as when characters are jumping around, or for these little thought bubbles. So for the sound effects, I have another folder as well, and the way they were organized originally, they were all just numbered, and that's not very useful, but I did label some of the more common ones I use. So for the turn on game, the light bulb, we'll just drag it over, make sure it sounds like it's right around where it needs to be. Yep, that sounds good. And for this one, a little smile, we'll just use the yes pitch for that one. Then I'm just going to nest these two individual sequences together, or these two sequences individually, and then what I'll do is, because they're nested and all together, they will make for a much easier transition into one another. So there's a couple ways you can transition between two scenes. You can just right-click between them, apply default transitions, and it will automatically do like whatever a fade is. Or you can go to, clear that out, your video transitions and do whatever ones you want to do. I'm fine with the simple fade out. Works for me. And with all that taken care of, we can add music, which I usually like to do last. Sometimes I do like to actually try and match up animations or little moments in the animations with cues in the music, but we won't do that this time. That's much too complex for something so simple as a demonstration. And of course, I also like to bring the music down. I think 5 decibels will do just fine. And maybe a little lower yet. 5 or 10, it's probably enough just for these kinds of things. And I'm going to just trim down the opening a little bit, and then we'll move it all back. So if you're in a position where you're satisfied with the work you've done, obviously make sure you save it so you don't lose any progress. Then what you're going to want to do is just to export and then media. There's nothing really specific I do here. For the format, I do H.264 and then match the source to high bitrate. And that's all I really play around with here. You don't need to worry too much about the settings here, I don't think. And then export it and go to wherever it is you exported it to. But before we can finish this off entirely, you must do one last task, and that is step number 5, post it to the internet and cry while reading everyone's wonderful comments. This all started off as just a little passion project I had, making 2 fictional characters I enjoy be happy together. And that's where this all came from. It was just a simple little thing, much like this, but even smaller in scope. And people loved it so much that it gave me many more ideas, and it expanded into something much greater than I ever thought it was going to be when I made that initial sprite for the first time. So I hope that you found this process interesting, I hope you found it enlightening, and if I've inspired you to make your own sprite animations, I hope you make them. I'm not claiming ownership over any of the, well, ownership in the sense I made them, but not like any specific, this is my own thing and you can't do it. Of course you can do it, and I've shown you how. I hope you do it, because I'll be in a position where I won't be able to make these quite as often, so I don't mind other people picking up the slack. I mean, if you think about it, I stole this idea from professional video game developers who were paid to do this, and I am not. I'm doing this because I'm having fun, and I hope you have fun doing it as well. But knowing how much of a pain in the ass it is to get started, I'll save you all one step. If you want to make your own Golden Sun animations, in the description or somewhere I'll be leaving a media share link where you can download the archive I have of all the sprites I ripped and used for these animations, so that way you can get started much faster. You don't have to rip them yourself, you don't have to upscale them, you don't have to do anything but find a way to animate them. So that's going to be somewhere in the comments. You'll have a head start, you'll have something I didn't have starting out, so hopefully that makes it easier on you. Or you can use them for whatever else you want to as well. I don't need credit or anything, just use them however you feel, and I hope it's enough for you. So once again, I hope you found this interesting or enlightening, or you just liked listening to my voice. I hope to have satisfied all of your curiosities. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you during the next project that I make. Bye now.